Hello and welcome to Analog Insights. Today we review a very special camera that is famous for its lightweight, very small size and incredible viewfinder. And that is the Olympus OM-1. And in order to do that, we went to an aircraft museum close to Munich. So let's take a look around. The Olympus OM-1 was first introduced in 1972 at Photokina. The first original name was Olympus M1, and of course that is very similar to the Leica M rangefinder system, which also had an M1 in its setup by the time. And of course Leica immediately disputed the name, and Olympus changed it to OM1. It is interesting to note, of course, that the M in the case of Leica stands for German word Messsuche, which is rangefinder, while in the case of Olympus they named it for the legendary designer Maitani. The Olympus OM-1 is an all-mechanical camera. It does feature a built-in light meter, but you basically turn it on in addition to all the functionality that it already brings about. So it just works on its own, and all you do is you would operate this little on switch here in order to get the functionality of the built-in light meter in addition to that. It is a center-weighted light meter that operates with a center-the-needle mode, so to speak. So if you look through the viewfinder, you have a little plus and a minus and the needle in between. And of course, you should try to get it between the two poles there. And what is also important to note here is that this camera is famous for its beautiful, bright and especially large viewfinder. It has a 0.92 times magnification, which is really amazing, and similar to the Leica M3, by the way, which is also famous for its viewfinder. So this is really nice. And also using it with a wide-angle lens, as we do today with the 28mm f2 lens, it's just beautiful, the kind of clarity that you get and how easy it is to focus using that viewfinder. The camera is famous for its small size and lightweight, and this is also the real innovation that we're talking about, because when Olympus hit the market with the OM system in 1972, they were kind of late at the game, because there were all sorts of established players already in this 35mm SLR market. And they put a lot of energy and time and effort into observing that market and ensuring that they would come up with an innovation that is relevant. And it was relevant because by that time the typical SLR cameras had become bulky and heavy and so forth. And managing to bring all the things that are usually part of an SLR into such a small form factor that is usually reserved for rangefinder cameras, this was the real innovation. And there was also a legendary designer behind it, which is Yoshisa Martinet, who was also responsible for the Olympus Pen and Olympus Pen F camera series. So he already had some experience in bringing all sorts of technology into a compact form factor. And according to some sources, Olympus spent up to 5 years prototyping and doing one iteration after the other and coming up with this very beautiful, simple and perfect design. What is remarkable about this design is, if you look at the top plate, it's completely different to what we usually see in modern SLRs, because it only features this on-off switch that I already talked about that turns on the light meter, and most importantly, an ASA dial to set your ISO for your film. Then you only have, of course, your shutter, the film advance and a frame counter, but that's it. No mode selector, no exposure compensation dial and all the features that you usually see. And most importantly, no shutter dial, no shutter speed dial. Because in the case of the OM-1, this is located around the lens. So up front, which has the beautiful advantage that once you get used to it, you can basically keep the camera up to your eye and set both the aperture and the shutter speed in order to get your exposure right. And what is also important to mention, if we already talk about the shutter, we have a horizontal focal plane shutter in here with shutter speeds ranging from 1 second to 1/1000th of a second and a bulb mode. So we finished shooting at the Aircraft Museum, and on our way back to town, we discussed this beautiful OM system. And as some of you might know already, Jules is a fan of the OM system, and for plenty of good reasons. What Olympus usually brings about is a great build quality, incredible design, so a strong focus on simplicity, on only putting the important features onto this camera. And what it also brings about is access to these amazing Zuiko lenses, and that are also famous for great optical performance. And what is important to mention here is that when the OM system was introduced in '72, it already featured over 30 lenses, and in this particular case here, 12 interchangeable focusing screens. So quite a lot of accessories, and they build it from there. So today we really have access to all sorts of incredible accessories. And what I personally found interesting, and this is also a connection to this camera, is that this was Jules' first 35mm SLR camera. And when I got to know him, he always talked about the OM system and how beautiful it was. And as he had just his birthday coming up, I kind of casually asked in advance, what is the kind of camera that you would really want in the OM system? And he instantly said the OM-1. This was the first one that I had, and it's such a beautiful all-mechanical camera. So I reached out to the OM doctor, who is a former mechanic here based in Hamburg in Germany, a former Olympus mechanic, and he's basically cleaning, adjusting and lubricating these cameras still, and offering them for sale, and bought this OM-1 as a birthday gift. So, and not only exciting Jules, of course, but also myself, because I realized it's such a beautiful and wonderful system that can certainly compete on many levels with the Leica M system that I'm personally very fond of. So this just to address the emotional quality that many people associate with the OM system. So now let's take a closer look at the shortcomings of the Olympus OM-1, and there are only very few. The first one is that it does not feature any auto exposure mode. And that is primarily important for starters, so people who are just starting out with 35mm cameras and want to have an aperture priority or shutter priority mode. This is something that this camera won't feature. At the same time, it's also great for learning, so if you're really starting out and want to learn the connections between aperture, shutter speed and ISO, it is a great camera to do that, because you do have a built-in light meter and kind of a suggestion of what your correct exposure would be, but you don't have a complete automation that kind of takes away all the decisions that you would have to make. So this is to some extent a shortcoming, but to some people it might also be interesting. And I personally learned photography with my Leica M6, which is very similar to this one here in terms of being a completely mechanical camera but having a built-in light meter. Kind of connected to that is the second shortcoming, which is that it does not display any information about the set aperture or shutter speed within the viewfinder. So you would either have to guess by operating it here with your hands when you have it up to your eyes, or basically taking it down and taking a look at the settings that you have. So that is kind of unfortunate. Another important issue is that the light meter is optimized for 1.35 volt batteries, mercury batteries that are not available anymore. And if you get this camera professionally cleaned, lubricated and adjusted, many will set the light meter to 1.5 volt batteries that are still available and that ensure that the light meter works correctly. And I would highly encourage you to take a look at the cameras if you want to buy one used that feature that adjustment. One last important shortcoming is, and that is a crucial one, that the film advance is probably the only thing about the camera that does not feel as high quality as everything else. So when you look at cameras like the Leica M3 or many others that really focus on having a really smooth and nice film advance, and where you can really feel that the shutter is cocked and it sounds beautifully, here sounds a bit sad and doesn't really live up to the rest of the quality of this camera. So the film advance is also a small shortcoming. So we spent the weekend reviewing the Olympus OM-1, and our assessment is that it's really an amazing, small, lightweight 35mm camera, and especially with a very bright and beautiful viewfinder that's just a joy to use. What I personally like the most is its simplicity and how easy it is to understand and operate. And once you've got your hang around using the shutter speed dial here around the lens, it's so much fun, and it's just a beautiful camera to use. I also like that its functionality is disconnected from the light meter, so that you can basically decide whether you want to use the light meter or not. It's just optional. That is really nice as well. Overall, it is a camera that I would highly recommend to anyone who's starting out with analog photography and is interested in really getting a good understanding of how aperture, shutter speed, ISO and so forth all kind of relate to each other, and still have a built-in light meter without all the automation that kind of takes away the decision making for you. If you're interested in getting one, I would also encourage you to get one that is a little bit more expensive, but then completely cleaned, lubricated and adjusted, and also has its battery, the light meter, set to 1.5 volt. I personally can recommend the old mechanic, the old Olympus mechanic living in Hamburg, the OM Doctor. So I'm just mentioning it here because otherwise we get questions in the comments below, and we'll answer it there. So I highly recommend getting the camera from there, and I also did the same with our version here that I got for Jules' birthday. So we hope you enjoyed this review of the Olympus OM-1, and we're looking forward to reading your comments in the comment section below. If you like this video, please remember to like it and maybe share it with your friends. And if you want to see more videos like that, please subscribe to our little channel. As you know, Jules and I really appreciate it. So we hope to see you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.